Western Shoshone territory. And that has been the challenge at the international level. And so in some ways that's helped because we don't have a lot of conflict with private landowners. Our issues with the federal government, which out in rural Nevada, a lot of the ranchers agree with us because they don't like what the BLM is doing either. So in some ways, like I said, that's helped us gain some support. But in other ways, we're trying to negotiate with basically this invisible headless entity that seems to shift from DC to New York to wherever. So negotiations have been very difficult. We then took it when they said the Inter-American Commission wasn't binding on them because they're simply a member of the Organization of American States and they haven't fully ratified any treaty under the Inter-American system. There's a treaty, the Convention on the Rights and Duties of Man. The U.S. has not adopted that. They have simply become a member of the Organization of American States, and so the treaty body that are the law that we use was the Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, and they informed us that they don't think it's binding. So we took it to the UN, and we took it to a body called the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The U.S. signed and ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, okay, back in the 1980s. And I guess the attorneys in the State Department that read this document didn't think that it had any implications besides those that the U.S. had already put in place with the civil rights movement and the different federal laws that came out of the civil rights movement. What they didn't realize is that Indigenous people were going to look at that and say, you know what? We have rights to be free from racial discrimination as well. And I'll tell you what, at least from my experience as an attorney, I haven't seen any more racially based, antiquated, and I'm going to use the word genocide motivated doctrine than the doctrine of discovery. I mean, that says that because you're non-European and you're non-Christian, that you're less than other human beings. And if you look at some of the case law, I mean, the word savage, childlike, animal-like, beast, these are actually still in current case law in the United States of America and still applied against Indigenous peoples. And that is what has been coming out. And that's the way we wrote our briefs to the UN. We call it CERD for short, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The first review of the United States took place in 2002 was the first review of the United States. And the U.S., we were able to submit questions to the committee. And the committee members, 13 of the 18 committee members raised questions specifically on Native American and Indigenous rights in the United States. The U.S. was not ready for it. They didn't think this was an issue. So their response to the question about what gives the United States the right to claim that they have plenary power over Indigenous peoples, that they have the right to unilaterally abrogate Indigenous lands and territories without just compensation, without free, prior, and informed consent. What gives you the right that thinks you can do that? They cited to Johnson versus McIntosh. They cited to this case that Professor Miller just informed you about, that's based on this so-called doctrine of discovery. The committee was appalled. Their response, and I was trying to remember the exact quote. I have it in some different things I kept, but I didn't bring it with me. But it was something to the effect, this expert slammed his fist on the table and said, we are appalled that you would cite to this antiquated racist doctrine that has been rejected by the enlightened members of the international community, and that the U.S. would continue to enforce this on the living victims of this doctrine. It was so, I had goosebumps when we had this whole Shoshone delegation with us. This is over in Geneva, Switzerland. And it just made your hair stand on end because for once, publicly, you see this exposed. And that's one thing that we've been talking about because people say, and Tupac said one of the objectives is to look at, what do we do now? And I think bringing it here